Yeah. We are live. Hello and good. I never know what to say at 12 o'clock. Good afternoon. It's nice to see you all. If you are here already, thank you for joining early. You must be in much anticipation for Tim to share all of his useful knowledge and experience and advice and insights, which I'm also very excited for. I was here a little bit early as well, but that's because I asked him to join us early. Anyway, I'm rambling already. It's nice to see you all. If you are here already, please get yourself in the comments, say hello, tell us where you're joining from, put your name as well, just in case it doesn't come up. Sometimes it doesn't, but please, put your name in as well. And we'll get going in the next, where are we? 40 seconds ish. All the way through this, please feel free to ask Tim questions because your questions will be more insightful than mine. Really looking forward to this conversation with Tim. Hey, Tim. I see you just sitting there smiling. I thought I might introduce you to this ramble. Don't make me feel so bad.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Rich, and thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here with you. Really looking forward to talking to you and to everyone else.
This is long well overdue, right? We were meant to do this in January sometime.
Yeah, we've got around to it, around the busyness and hecticness of everything else, haven't we?
Yeah, exactly. But it's good to be doing it. I'm just going to switch off my Wi-Fi because my computer is telling me that I have terrible signal. So I'm going to do that. Anyway, let's get started. Tim, everybody, nice to have you here. Really excited to have this conversation about right to disconnect. But it's bigger than that conversation. It's looking at how we create really positive well-being, looking at psychosocial risks, psychosocial at work, well-being, ourselves, our teams, and how we just create really good places to be, but also looking at that rights to disconnect, legislation, organisations, etc., etc. There's going to be so much value in this. So if you are here, please, if you have any insights or questions or things you want to drop, please do. But let's get going. Look, I'll do my introduction first, Tim, to get out of the way, and then I'm going to throw it over to you. If you don't know who I am, in one of Tim's connections, my name's Rich. I am a high-performance executive coach. I help leadership teams and individuals perform at their best sustainably through three different angles. Learnings from sport and what we can take from the best sports teams and individuals in the world. My own performance framework, looking at 6 key pillars to performance. And then using assessments, using colours to help us understand how to communicate and create effective teams, as well as owning the Wellbeing chat in a company called Employees Health, which is a wellbeing focused organisation, helping organisations improve their wellbeing. So there's a lot in there. If you want to know a bit more about me, come and find me, ask me a question, set up a call, and we can go through that. So that's me out of the way. Tim, rather than me butcher your introduction and downplay it, please introduce yourself and tell me who you are, what you do.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Rich, and hello to everybody. It's really good to be with you. I'm Tim. As you know, I help people and individuals, organisations to be more well and to have greater impact in the areas of life that concern them the most. That's what I'm about. I do that in a few different ways. My employed work is with Bupa as Global Employee Health and Wellbeing Manager. And so that means that I work with and support our global market units, so businesses in different countries, to implement and develop our global wellbeing, inclusion, health and safety framework. And I also have the real privilege of leading our global program called Personal Energy, with which I work with a fantastic global working group who are involved in delivering out what essentially is a resilience and a wellbeing program to frontline colleagues and teams across the globe. So in terms of aged care environments, care homes, clinics, hospitals, those kind of things as well. So that's a real privilege for me too. But outside of work, I coach my eldest son's rugby team. I play a little bit, but not so much anymore. Aches and pains take just a tiny little bit longer to recover these days than they did in my rugby heyday, shall we call it. That's making it sound very grand. I was no professional, and I do some volunteering work every year with a local homeless charity as well. So wherever I am, you'll find me trying to kind of help people make things a bit better for themselves in life in general. And that's broadly what I'm about.
I love that, Tim. You can see that passion for helping people kind of play through all three roles, right? Which I think's A fantastic thing. I'm going to kick this off and ask you about kind of the work you're doing, for you to tell the audience, what you are working on at the moment and kind of that area of focus for you.
Yeah, of course. So what I and we within Bupa are working on at the moment, a couple of key headline pieces. We've each actually recently done a refresh and an evolution of that global framework that I mentioned, our global strategy on wellbeing, inclusion, health and safety.
Mm-hmm.
And that's being done as a natural part of the performance and strategy development process, but in particular because we've recently developed an ever more ambitious global business strategy, which is building on Bupa's great successes over the last 3 to 4 years under our CEO Iñaki, and that provides ambitious goals, meaningful goals, but also plenty of desire to keep people and support people to have a great experience across their broad experience of work. So we've been doing some tweaking and consultation and updates to that framework. And one of the particular areas of focus that's developed over the last year and beyond is this idea of the broad experience of work, and in particular framed around topics that everyone listening has probably heard of, things like psychological safety, psychosocial health and safety, which are quite often quite technically jargonized areas. But basically what we're talking about is what it's like for people to be at work with their team doing their job. And that's very much where the focus has been. So we've been doing an amount of work to update our what's called a global enterprise policy for wellbeing, health and safety, and then various different pieces of work in different countries that are all framed around making sure the environment that people work in is one that's beneficial for them and limits burnout and stress as far as possible,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the important role of leaders and managers and work around that. So helping leaders and managers to not only have the relevant awareness, but also the right capability so that they can, if you like, deploy and use the right kind of behaviours. And that, to be, that sounds a very technical way of putting it. We want people to be able to relate to one another and work well together. That's the basis of it. So those are particular areas we've been focusing on recently, and hence why this topic that you and I spoke about, Rich, right to disconnect, seems a really useful framing to it, because that's been quite topical in the news over the last year and beyond, with various different countries bringing in right to disconnect legislation, which in essence is about the question of what it's like for people to do their jobs. What are some of the specific things that put people under excessive demand?
Mm-hmm.
The idea of right to disconnect has been really framed around emails and digital communication, but it's really then set within that broader framework of what is it like for me to do my job, to communicate with my team, what are the expectations on me and the demands on me, and particular the two really key psychosocial risks of control, the level of control I've got over my work, and the demands that I'm under. We can talk a little bit more broadly about what psychosocial risk means, but those are a couple of the particular key areas.
Yeah, let's do this. Let's dive into that. What that kind of actually really means. And I've got a follow-up question. So yeah, dive into that for me a bit more.
Yeah, sure. So perhaps if it might be useful if I frame this idea of psychosocial risk and what are we talking about, because it's a topic that's been around for a while, and it's related to various different other topics, but I'm conscious it can quite easily get a bit overwhelming in terms of the technicality of it and the jargon of it. So basically what we're talking about is what it's like for people to do their job. Certainly within the UK, a useful framing of it is in an area you can read more on, and that I find very useful, is the Health and Safety Executive Management Standards for stress. And that's a pretty good framing of what we're talking about when we say psychosocial risk. So the 6 key areas: the demands that people are under. That doesn't necessarily mean the amount of stuff that people have got to do. It's the overall level of demand, and we can come on to that a little bit more when we talk about emails. But as an example, working on your inbox and the perception that doing work is working on my inbox, that as a demand. Is that really doing the job, or is it just another demand? So we're talking demands in the broadest sense. So that's number one, demands. Control, the level of control an individual has got to do their job with a reasonable, level of resources and support come into that as well. So what control has somebody got to do their job effectively? Support from line manager as well as wider colleagues. Relationships, so the quality of relationships around a person, both within their own team, but others that they interface with in an organisation. Role, having clarity of role is really, really key. What am I supposed to be doing? How does that relate to other people? And change. So we all know that change is is not an occasional thing. It's constant, which I think is a good thing. Evolution is important, both for ourselves as individuals, as teams and organisations, because the world is changing and we want to do things a bit better all the time if we can. But at the same time, that can be quite stressful for people. Badly managed change is incredibly stressful for people. So that's another really, really key area as well. There are a couple of things I'd probably highlight within that. There was some really interesting research at the end of last year, about November, I think it was published by the McKinsey Health Institute that broke down, a greater range of factors that contribute either to employee thriving, but also contributors to burnout. And a couple of really key things in that for me that really relate to what we're talking about and this idea of right to disconnect, which is that the things that tend to drive burnout are in some ways quite distinct from those things that support thriving. Now, you probably need a decent baseline of not having people stressed out to the eyeballs in order that they can thrive, right? Within work, but also outside of work. But in terms of things that have a predictive effect on people's risk of burnout, the top things there are things like toxic behavior, unsurprisingly. So that fits to relationships at work. People are being bullied or there's open, conflicts. That's clearly not going to be good. And it stresses people out, understandably. But then the next two, which explain a fair percentage, I think about 15% of burnout, or the likelihood of experiencing burnout from this research, was basically lack of role clarity, role ambiguity and role conflict. So not really knowing what I'm supposed to be doing and not really understanding what I'm supposed to be doing in relation to what somebody else is doing. And if we don't, and we probably all experience this ourselves, right? I know I have, whereby I kind of got a sense of what I'm doing, but then there's somebody else who's doing a bit of a similar thing and is sort of doing things and not talking to me, and I don't understand, how relationships are working. That's a really big driver of burnout. So within those 6 areas I mentioned, there's some important nuance to understand that relates to the impact on both people's well-being and their ability to do their jobs really well, which obviously we all want to do because that's an important part of our sense of self and sense of ability to thrive.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You began to talk about that role clarity. My brain went, as always, straight to sport. And the moments I've been in that sport, when you're playing with somebody who maybe doesn't understand their role, or maybe there's confusion between how the roles are played, and when that does happen, nothing clicks and the performance drops, frustration increases, and you aren't as successful. And you can see that probably being the same, because I think everybody wants to feel success.
For sure. Absolutely. And I think, that's key. When we look at, we're all concerned with, in one form or another, I'm concerned, you're concerned with people, yes, being well, but people performing, and the people that, use your coaching or, ask me questions within Bupa or in whatever area it might be, are concerned both to do a good job, but concerned for the people around them, as well. And I think we've seen a lot of changes, in my experience of working with organisations in the last, certainly 10 years plus. I think we've seen a big shift in people's perception of work in relation to mental health. For example, 10 years ago, it was, you were doing a good job or an unusually good job if there was, mental health workshops at lunchtime and a mindfulness webinar once a quarter or something like that. There were, and there still are, organisations who kind of well-being wash like that by just doing stuff around the fringes. But then what it's like to actually do the job is not pleasant, and people aren't pleasant to each other. And so, fast forward to now, and in terms of your analogy with a team sport, everybody wants to come to work to do a good job, be recognised for it, I don't think, people always want work to be perfect and every last thing you do to be brilliant and wonderful and brilliantly meaningful. I think we all understand that, some aspects of work, depending on what it is that we do, aren't going to always be the most fun. Sometimes work will be busy. There'll be a bit more pressure, and that's fine. And we see in research that people can deal with a lot of stuff to do, a lot of tasks, a lot of potential demands, but where there's a good level of support, where there's good relationships around it, and people know what they're supposed to be doing and how that relates to each other, and that people will talk about it to iron out any differences or issues, and hopefully to share with each other to do things better, then people can cope with an awful lot. If you're in a good environment, you can have a hell of a lot of stuff to do. Excuse my language. But if you've got that support around you and that understanding of what you're supposed to be doing, that can make things an awful lot easier.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Just before I say, you must have seen Thomas comment. I saw you smile when he did. Thanks, Tom, for joining. I hope you're still here. Any questions, drop us a line. Okay. Look, I don't think you guys don't do this work without there being challenges. And so what I'd really like to see, obviously we've spoken a little bit about this, but what the biggest challenges are, both yeah, for well-being, psychosocial risk. What's the other one you said? I'm just gone from top of my head.
Yeah, performance,
Psych
to do a
safety.
good job of things. Yeah.
Yeah, psych safety. What are the biggest challenges you're seeing, and that this is trying to kind of solve, I guess?
Yeah, sure. So I think, in terms of a broader context that this fits into, the world of work has changed a lot post-COVID in particular, right? And that comes in terms of, post-COVID, there was an increase in, COVID-driven retirements, people changing jobs, turnover, etc. But then expectations as well. And I think, there's been both increasing expectations from employees, particularly younger employees, I would say, but employees in the main, around flexibility. But also then in terms of all of us as consumers, we all expect to have stuff available at our fingertips and get the Amazon delivery, today, ideally, if not tomorrow. And that plays out in lots of different areas, right? So we're all party to this increase in wanting effectively work to be done as quickly as possible and relevant to me and as convenient for me as possible. So your question kind of around what are the problems, what are the challenges, I think is probably balancing the needs of a business with the expectations of employees. And that's not a problem. It's an important point of understanding to get to, I would say. So I think for me, in terms of key areas looking globally in the work that I do, I think it's fair to say that understanding, Bupa employs a lot of people working in frontline environments, for example, who have physically got to be there to look after people in a care home or a clinic or a dental practice or whatever it might be. So, and that's non-negotiable. People need to be there. But at the same time, I think there's been a useful challenge there for us broadly to ask ourselves the question of, okay, well, what could be more flexible? What could be different? And through a process, two bits to it, through a process of rigorous implementation of risk assessment processes. So putting employee wellbeing as a first point of thought rather than a reactive measure. This is really key to this. That's really, really key. So risk assessment processes, which understand, what and where there are factors that are causing people undue stress. That's really key. And I think in terms of making things better, to your point about solving issues or preventing certain problems, is understanding that, well, what are the little things that we can do to improve people's broad experience of work that we perhaps weren't thinking about before. And I mean, we in the broadest sense. And as we've come to it, and learning from colleagues around the world and looking at other organisations and research and so on, I think this a very similar thing is continues to be true, that has been true all the way through this journey of mental health and organisations over the last 10 years. And that is basically that an awful lot depends on, yes, the processes and systems and norms that we have, but there's an awful lot locked up in relationships and how people relate to one another. That's a really major part of it. If we look across, those areas of psychosocial risk that I talked about, relationships, support, and demands. Take those three, and this links into the topic of right to disconnect that we've highlighted. So relationships, control, and support. If you've got sporting example, a high performing team, I follow people from ex-military background who become celebrities, etc. And I think a similar thing is true. You take people in the most hectic, demanding, stressful, fast-paced environments, and what marks out a high-performing team is one where everyone can bring themselves, their own opinions, their own capabilities into the mix.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has a responsibility and is okay with the responsibility. That's precisely what they should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, it's not okay. It's detrimental, yes, for the individual, but also for the team if anybody's being ignored or ridiculed or dismissed, because therefore the team is missing out on a different perspective and a different level of capability, for example. And so in terms of your question around problems and what are the key, I think of, what are the key areas to focus on and continue to develop, is there's a lot to be said for both relationships, but also awareness, particularly of managers and leaders for sure. But I think colleagues across the board and, anyone listening to this, we'll finish off on thinking about what are the things that people can do. I would say that the biggest learning that I've had is that there are very simple, really straightforward things that people can do and that we can start to get people to think about more, I think is the real key, that help improve the experience of work for themselves and other people around them. And that, I think, the answer to your question in terms of not problems to solve, but what are the most important fundamental improvements we can make. And it's probably those little examples of how people relate and communicate to one another in the actual process of doing their job, and then understanding why that's relevant and why it's important, rather than just continuing to work the way we did 5 years, 10 years, 20 years ago, with good human relationships at the centre of it. That would be my 2p's worth on it.
Yeah, it's really interesting to use relationships, and my brain went to the way world of the last kind of 5 years, right? You think about the hybrid online offline world, bringing people back into work, all of those different challenges, and like the keyboard. I'm going to usually use the word keyboard warrior there, but I know that my non-verbal skills, being a dyslexic, aren't very good, and they can be read very differently. And actually, where we get in the space to build those relationships and understand each other and how we are communicating, I think all of those things, both in the online world and the offline world, are having a big impact on that relationship and the ability to build trust, that safety, that community, that kind of higher performance environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we talk about right to disconnect, which is, a broad topic, but it really, we'll talk a bit more about it, but it really comes down to that point in terms of, what are the specific things that we can do differently. It comes down to that, that relational piece. And in terms of, would it be useful if I give a bit of framing just around right to disconnect and
that was literally going to be my next question anyway. Was just
how it links into that. So people might, it's been a news topic if you follow certain areas of news, and so where's that all come from and where's it gone? And to me, this is a great commentary on the importance of understanding and communication from an organisational point of view, as well as an individual kind of interrelational point of view as well. So Right to Disconnect kicked off it was in 2017 when France was the first country to bring in formal legislation around this in quite a prescriptive manner. And that was done on the basis that there had been a long recognised, if you like, attendance culture in French working culture, in essence, that was seen to have, a detrimental impact on people. So France introduced this legislation, and similar legislation was introduced by Spain and Belgium, that was fairly prescriptive, in essence, that certainly in France, that prohibits contact with employees outside of working hours. So you're not allowed to send an email at 6 o'clock in the evening or 7 o'clock in the evening, something like that. And there is even examples of email deletion protocols if emails are sent out of the right kind of time. So it's very, very strictly enshrined. English speaking countries have tended to take a less prescriptive approach and a more advice guidance centric approach. So Canada and Australia, for example, Australia introduced their legislation at the end of last year, which essentially required organisations to provide guidance and an expectation that employees do not have an expectation that if contacted outside of their typical understood working hours, they won't have an expectation on them to respond to that. And if there were any negative repercussions from that, then the organisation would be potentially liable for that. And to date, as far as I understand from colleagues in Australia, it's gone fine. But I think there were some concerns initially, as there have been in other countries, around does right to disconnect mean a ban on emails or communications outside of a certain time? Because that had been precisely the case in other countries, and there was concern over productivity. Equally, does it stop people having, or to what extent could it stop people having a level of flexibility as well? And certainly what we've seen from Australia and talking to Australian colleagues is that's not been a problem at all. It's actually been quite beneficial. And employees have appreciated being able to be flexible. So actually being able to retain the ability to do work in the evenings, if that, or at whatever time in the afternoon. And we certainly see from research that's good for outcomes in terms of people's family life. So people can, take a bit of time in the middle of the day to do a school run or go to an appointment or whatever, and then just get things finished off at the end of the day. I was having a conversation with a colleague in New Zealand the last week, and she said, actually, because I tried to bring it as early as possible, and she said actually an hour or two later would actually work better for me because my kids will be out of the way, dinner will be done, they'll be in bed, and every couple of months it's fine to have a call at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the evening, and I'd quite like to do that because it's a really good bit of work we're working on, and that would help me manage things better. So that flexibility is really, really key, and that's what the Australian legislation and the Canadian legislation brought in. It's still under review in the UK. That's not been legislated for, but there's an ongoing piece of consultation around whether that will be beneficial. And certainly the general thinking, there's the policy liaison group that we've contributed to a little bit at Westminster, and very much the thinking there seems to be that there should ideally be some kind of government guidance or let's say guidance to organisations that organisations really should have a clear formalised message to articulate the understanding of the expectation rather of how email and digital led communications are actually used, so that it's people retain their flexibility, which is of genuine benefit to work flexibly, whether it's remotely, but in terms of time as well. But then without having an automatic expectation on them to respond to whatever their boss sends them at whatever time of day or night.
Yeah, I find it a really interesting concept, and you can definitely see the benefit. And my only gut feeling is, isn't that kind of what we should be doing anyway? And so my worry is for those high pressure environments, law, finance, some of those ones where maybe they don't play by the rules as well as others. How are they going to buy in, and how that's going to change, especially when it comes to expectations, when it comes to clients? I see that being a real challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's a really key point you've hit on, is that it's about having an appropriate level of understanding and agreement on both sides, right? People who are employed to do a job which has parameters and expectations and so on. And so in terms of thinking about what do I as a leader or an organization or whatever it might be actually do, this is certainly not in where we've seen it work best. This is not about just meeting employee needs and being dictated to by what any given employee might want. It's done both in service of the the individual, but also in service of the organisation as well. So how any sort of guidance or change in communicational practice is actually employed within any given organisation, within a particular given sector, has obviously got to take into account the particular nature of that environment and how that works, because it's
Yeah.
about performance as well as the fact that it's equally about well-being. But you mentioned in terms of buy-in, we know that very well that more engaged employees who are better supported, have good relationships, despite being in the busiest and most pressured, environments, let's say from a client perspective, can work well and certainly better than they would do if they lacked that support, that control, and reasonable amount of flexibility in how they do their work, how they communicate, and so on.
Yeah.
And I think there's a really important piece there around norms, organisational norms. So, in essence, in looking at, if there's a company or just a team, or there might be just an individual or a manager who's listening to this, who's thinking, okay, well, there's no legislation in the UK. I don't have to do anything. What's the point in doing anything in particular? The case is very clear and it's very strong that better relationships, better communication, reasonable amount of control. So common sense comes into this as well, right? An understanding of what doing business and doing work is really like for a team or an organisation. There are things that people can do, individuals can do, right now, to bolster, if you like, that strength and that ability of that team to be cohesive, to communicate really well, and to make sure everybody is able to fulfill on their own responsibility to bring the best of themselves to the work of that team. If that's the right way to put it. And so I think, with respect to the particular nuances of a particular industry area, it's worth asking the question, what if anything is preventing our people or our teams from really bringing the best out of themselves within the team environment? And is there anything, no matter how small, that might be precluding that? And one of the things could be the norms of how we communicate, the norms of how or whether or not we listen to people, including the most junior members of the team. Is there a space and is there an atmosphere whereby people are not only expected to bring the best of themselves, but they're given a reasonable opportunity to actually, speak up? I don't think it's about doing anything other than providing the right opportunities for people to do that, whether it's in a team environment or in a one-to-one environment. Are we enabling to the right extent people to speak up, give their opinions, give their ideas, so that the whole team can go faster?
Yeah. I like that term about expectations.
Yeah.
Bringing those in and actually
Yeah.
communicating those expectations across team. How do we want to work? Organizational kind of how does that look as well? And like you're saying, we do as coaches, you kind of set that expectation. And
Absolutely.
go from a group standpoint as a team sports coach, how do we want to buy into this? How do we want to create success? What does that mean? What does the boundaries need to look like? How do you want to do this and be successful here? Because then everybody buys into that. I think it's an important part.
Absolutely. And it's an easy one to miss, right? That's the whole point of the word norm, is, when things are normal, it's very difficult sometimes, or not difficult, but it's not the first thing you think of doing just to stop and reevaluate. And it's true of all of us. We're used, and we have habits, and humans develop habits for good reasons, that, you can't stop and think about everything you're doing every day. And is this a good idea or not? That's why we have habits. That's why they're useful. Hopefully though, we've got useful habits. And so at the same time, I think it's a very powerful thing at the right time and at the right moment for an individual or a team or a leader to just stop and think, okay, well, what are we doing here? How are things working? How are things running? And I think that process of self-evaluation, self-analysis, and, identifying next steps is an important thing. I think within the coaching environment, as well as an organisation environment, a sports team environment, people sit down and review videos of their last game and how things are working, even if, a team has, just had a brilliant victory in their last game.
Mhm.
Would you expect, a high level sports team? I'm thinking of F1, I've been watching a bit of Formula One at the minute. They still sit down, even if,
Break it down.
a driver still won the last 10 races and they're 50 points ahead in the championship or something. They still sit down after every race and go, that went brilliantly. Is there anything where we got lucky that could have gone wrong? What could we do better? And I think that's really important. So I think it's
Yeah.
still very valid to suggest that even where you've got, a team that's, working well or performing well, what little improvements can we make? What are the norms that we've got in how we communicate, how we do work, that we might be able to improve on even further?
Yeah, I think there's so many bits coming out to me, um, and that last piece there is just around this marginal gains concept, right?
Yeah,
One
yeah,
1% better.
that's
How can
precisely
we be
it.
1% better? Just a
Yeah,
reflection. What can we stop? What can we start? What can we continue?
yeah,
But what can we? Yeah, how do we make a 1% improvement in the way we work, and to our performance? And I think I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm the role I'm in and work we do. We also think about the whole person. How are we as a human being? How can we be 1% better? Not just as an employee, which I think a lot of companies maybe focus on, but actually, how can I be better as a person as well?
yeah,
And that's 1% as well.
yeah, absolutely. But I'll tell you a story from my experience of this idea of self-awareness in an organisation. It was probably about 10 years ago. I was working for a different organisation, and it was effectively a provider of
Mm-hmm.
wellbeing services, let's say. And that's when I was more particularly focused in the sort of psychology and mental health space.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I was doing a lot of liaison work with organisations, helping them raise awareness in essence, particularly around preventative wellbeing in relation to the world of work, as well as clinical mental health. And we did some work with a law firm,
Mm-hmm.
and they, I did a lot of work and had a lot of conversations with the head of wellbeing, and I think it was wellbeing and benefits, something like that. And we were going through the process of providing an on-site therapist for like a
Mm-hmm.
half a day a week or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And as you do, you sit down and look at what are the needs, what are the issues, etc. And from just like a health absence point of view. And this particular organisation had no reported absence due to mental health issues, zero. And that on its own was like nothing, no,
Mm-hmm.
none. And so that just makes you start to think about, okay, well, what are the norms here in this very high paced sort of environment where the main measure on employees is how many hours they're billing and clocking up, etc. And so we put the on-site clinician in place, and they were immediately, like within 2 hours, booked out with a 3-month waiting list, which on its own showed that there was clearly a very strong and widespread unmet need. So the reason I say that is because that really taught me a lesson about
Mm-hmm.
norms of thinking, norms of behaviour, and a sense of what are the repercussions of sharing what's going on for me. So nobody wanted to report any issues with mental health, but when an opportunity to speak confidentially without anybody else in the wider organisation knowing what was going on, there was an enormous need there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the learning there was clearly the norms of working and communicating were very much the individual doesn't matter. The individual being seen as a high performer matters, but the individual as somebody who can, what's the right word, struggle and suffer and therefore need support, that just wasn't valid at all.
Yeah.
And so that's the complete antithesis
Yeah.
of what we're talking about by some of these principles that underpin having just a better understanding of the the importance, but the beneficial impact of people being able to just disengage appropriately from their
Yeah.
work at the right time and effectively have a breather at the right moment,
Mm-hmm.
so that they can come back and do the next thing really well, and therefore in their life overall be better off because their work is better for it. They're more engaged in their work, and the things outside of their life get more appropriate attention, which
Mhm.
makes a better, more well, more engaged person overall, who's much less likely to be burned out or struggling with mental health problems.
I think I always go to sport, right? So when you think about it from an employee standpoint, somebody the expectation on them is they don't, because they're not seen as sports people. They're not seen as like them working like physically. They don't see, okay, well, this person's not getting injured like you would get if you're overworking as a sports person. If you're overworking, you're probably going to put your muscles under strain. There's high risk of injury. But we don't connect that link between, well, if somebody's working in front of a computer and they're using their brain consistently, it's the energy that they're exhausting. And their brain is where their mental health is, right? What's that risk of injury? And it is that burnout, poor mental health, needing to speak out, and that performance that they're outputting. It's just switching the way that you're thinking about what that person's workload is and what sustainable performance looks like
Yeah.
for that role.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very relevant for individuals. And we might think about, what the practical things to be done, whether we're thinking about an organization and policy, or a team, or an individual, or a manager. And, again, but more like a sort of evidence on this, it just reiterates the point around, relationships, but also, so then capability. And I'm drawn to thinking of managers.
Mhm.
Right. So Gallup's State of the Global Workplace report, most recent report, just really highlighted both the important role of managers. And I'm always conscious when I start talking about managers that, we hear a lot, and we have done for years, that the role of the line manager is very important, and it absolutely is.
Mhm.
And I often think that topic can be raised with the sense that the line manager themselves has got loads of responsibilities, and the line manager is, are we thinking about their well-being as well? Yes, we
Mhm.
absolutely are. And I think
Mhm.
it's the support and development of line managers that is really, really key.
Mhm.
So the three top things that the Gallup report highlighted and referenced as areas for managers are really helping them develop properly. One is in terms of helping people to have develop basic coaching skills,
Mhm.
which sounds quite formal, but really we're talking about skills of how to interrelate with another person and understand the person, and
Mhm.
help that person bring the best of themselves to their work.
Mhm.
That's essentially what we're talking about. And when decent, effective training in that regard is provided to managers, those managers feel, confident and more capable. They're more engaged, and they're better able to get more, to get more, to get the best out of their team members, for example. So that's the first piece, is those kind of the coaching skills. Then secondly, it's ongoing development for the manager, just in terms of their role overall, having somebody to support them and develop them as an individual who's, got, more to give, and wants to kind of step up and take more responsibility, so to speak. And that's both in terms of just the basics of managing, right? So, we see this within Bupa, where we've developed programs to help maybe a first time people manager, so the person who's not had direct reports before, just understand what the key basics of doing that job are. Ideally, helping them with the coaching element as well. Just those kind of real simple, really straightforward basics, which in some areas are still pretty lacking. I think people get promoted. This whole analogy almost feels like a stereotype now, of people being promoted because they're good at doing their job, and you get put
Very
in a position to say,
distinctive.
well, you can tell other people how to do it as well. Then, well,
Yeah.
can they? Have we given them support to be able to do that, and developing that? There's a question mark. And so it's kind of those three areas which are really key in terms of just the basic training in a role, which is awareness, manager coaching skills, and then ongoing support and development. And really, that for me, that a key part of that is how people relate to one another, and supporting people to both not just have coaching skills, quote unquote.
Mhm.
Really, what underpins that is an understanding that relationships are really, really key.
Mhm.
That's really what it's about. I think you can, if you can help somebody get to a point where they can genuinely understand that how I relate to my team, and what I understand about my team, and who they are as people, and what got going on outside work. If you understand that and commit to that, you can make some pretty big strides forwards. There's obviously, there's some technical stuff around being a new manager that's really, really important. But with regards to people, just understanding that human connection is going to help you do your own job more easily, because you'll get more ideas from other people that you won't have to come up with yourself.
Yeah.
And you can help develop people, so you can delegate appropriately to people, which is good for them, but it's good for you and good for the team. And as a manager, then it helps you kind of lift your head up to the horizon a little bit more, and do perhaps have a little bit more time for, strategic thinking and so on, all
Yeah.
of which benefits the team as well. And for me, that, it just reiterates that point around, human connection and relationships, in addition to, technical skills,
Yeah.
which is really, really important.
It's understanding how people work best, right? It's
Yeah,
understanding,
sure.
just understanding a little bit of human psychology, human performance, um, implementing it as well, which is the challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also makes me think. So sorry to interrupt you. Just one other point that's just come to mind in terms of health outcomes. We know some research that um, family supportive manager behaviour, let's call it, whereby managers understand what's going on for their team outside of work, and they just simply act in respect of that. So they understand that, whatever it is an individual might have going on outside of work, that it is just a demand to them that they can bear in mind and show a bit of empathy for, in doing their job. And also, as is appropriate within the work, give somebody, and come back to those initial factors we talked about, a reasonable degree of autonomy and control to, and there's trust involved in that as well. So the line manager is giving trust, but also needs to be trusted by the employee, trusted to go, to do and manage around all the stuff that they've got going on.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that that is beneficial for outcomes, health outcomes, certainly prevent, outcomes in terms of preventable conditions.
Mm-hmm.
About 75% of medical insurance claims accrue because of preventable conditions. And one thing that has a particular knock-on impact to that is whether people can appropriately balance their homework, make the homework balance. And a manager being supportive of and aware of, sympathetic to, and appropriately supportive of somebody's family life in relation to work is a major part of that.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of bits standing out for me. I guess the first bit, which is interesting, is that they're just like everything, their role of leadership, and the role of the importance of how they're leading. When you speak about a couple of bits there, so talk about the trust. You speak about trust. It's not actually just trust in the leadership, but trust that the person you're giving that work to is also doing their work to a capable amount, respective amount. So trust is such an important thing in a team. So how do you build that? How do you get that to a state where both parties have that trust in each other to create that performance? But the thing which I keep coming back to, and this is where it's interesting, I've seen the wellbeing space go to, is this: where does ownership lie in regards to right to disconnect, right to the psychosocial risk, in regards to the demands, how the ownership would take over the control over relationships. I think it's a really important part, and then it comes to well-being, right? Where's that ownership on our own well-being? Because you said earlier on, we know the impact, we know what will happen when we look after our well-being, but taking ownership of it and not expecting somebody else to do it for us is important. So it's fitting that where we are. What understanding do we have on each area to fit into this positive work, right? Ultimately, that's what we work, or positive people.
Yeah, for sure. My reflection on that would be there's probably a couple of bits to it in terms of ownership, as you say. So, speaking from a UK perspective, in terms, every UK employer has a legal obligation to be aware of and mitigate risk to people's psychological well-being. So I talked about the health and safety executive management standards. There's a legal duty on all UK employers to make sure that people aren't unduly stressed, let's say, because they are managing those factors. So in terms of ownership, that's quite clear.
Mm-hmm.
as and when that's being done, then I would frame the question more as where's the opportunity to be had? So we know there's an opportunity to be had in people having a positive, supportive, um, thriving, let's say, work environment where people are, and to your point about the individual versus the organisation, where people are both by the organisation and the leaders of it who set, certainly set policies and have a big impact on norms, for sure. What is the opportunity to be had in taking as much responsibility for providing a quality experience while people are at work? Certainly in terms of from a health and safety risk point of view, physically and psychologically, that's the baseline. If those things aren't provided, then people will struggle and people will suffer. I don't think there's anybody in the UK, for example, who would bat an eyelid at saying physical health and safety is important and we shouldn't let people be injured at work, right? The same thing is true psychologically, right? It's just stupid from a business point of view, as much as a human moral point of view, to have an environment, from a physical point of view, if you're more or less likely to get a brick fall on your head or get run over by a crane in a building site, and we said well, are we bothered about that? Not sure. You'd be laughed out of the room, right? Exactly the same principle applies when it comes to psychological health and safety. That it should be a non-starter to countenance an environment where people are likely in any way to be harmed because of the environment itself. So the opportunity to be had is to prevent the problems that accrue because of that. Mental health problems, we know, the stats on mental health, suicide for a start, to know that should be a non-starter for people to be exposed to that kind of risk. And so there's an opportunity and a responsibility for organisations to mitigate that risk. In terms of where the benefit then lies, we know that highly engaged employees with good well-being, essentially physically and psychologically, are more likely to be then engaged and to perform well, to have pro-social behaviours. For example, they're more likely to go a bit further within appropriate levels for their team, for their employees, their customers, and so on. So there's a very clear business benefit to that. And then, and to your point around the responsibility of the individual, and I'm 100% with you on that as well. The individual is then responsible for bringing themselves to that point about the high-performing team. If there should be a good environment provided by the people who influence that, that includes the team members, because they will contribute and bring to that environment as well. So those individuals and all of us have a responsibility, both so that we can get the best out of ourselves to be well and engaged and enjoy life and be successful, but we have a responsibility to the people around us as well. So we all come with that responsibility. And that includes making sure you turn up in reasonable shape, right? Like, look after yourself, preserve your energy, enjoy your home life, do the things that might leave you a bit tired sometimes, but when it's time to turn up for work, turn up for work. Like the sports team, nobody's, if Lewis Hamilton turned up and he was hungover and wasn't too bothered on the day and hadn't really bothered sleeping really well, you'd be asking him why he was getting paid 10 million quid a year or how much he gets paid. So that individual piece is really important too, for sure.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, look, I want to begin to close this out. And what I want to do, normally I would ask the top 3 tips, and I said to you kind of beforehand.
Yeah.
But what I want us to do is to think about like a tip for each line. And the lines I see this in is the individual, what they can do to help improve this right to disconnect, or this right to, I feel like we covered a couple of angles. I don't know what to really call it, but the right to make sure that we are turning up for work as best we can.
Yeah.
What the team can do, what leaders can do, and what organizations. So just one tip that each line can do.
Yeah, I'll go from the top down, so to speak. In terms of organisations, you mentioned leaders and individual. I think organisations and obviously leaders are kind of inherent within this. And this is from the context, let's say, of a UK organisation where we don't have legislation, right? So there's no legal imperative to do this. So with that in mind, I'd say the top tip for an organisation is to understand what the norms are within your business
Mm-hmm.
that have an impact on how people communicate with each other. What is the tone that is set through the leaders and through how the organisation communicates out to the wider organisation about the fact, rather about how we work with one another. What are the themes there? What are people doing? What are engagement surveys showing? What are reasons for people leaving the company doing? What parts of the business are people leaving the company more frequently in, that you can use to paint a picture about how people are able to switch off from their work or not.
Mm-hmm.
So that's from an organisational point of view. I think from a leader point of view, it's probably quite similar. But from a leader individual point of view, I would say understand the shadow that you're casting. So what are you saying, but what are you doing that's setting the tone for how the people who report into you and the people who report into them are actually going about working, communicating in particular.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the expectations that you're setting? And understand that norms are very easily set and they can be very, very powerful. And it's not so much about, the volume of or the timing of when people are contacted, let's say outside of work. It's the perception of how that's received and how it's responded to as well. So is there any feeling in the mind of an employee that there's going to be repercussions if I don't respond to this?
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's understand the shadow that you're casting. And from an individual, I say absolutely, it's take responsibility for yourself, look after yourself in an appropriate way. Do switch off from work, but also do communicate as far as you're able, and hopefully there's a range of means available to communicate anything that's having a detrimental impact on you. So hopefully that would be through a line manager. And I'd say to a line manager, ask the question, do your team members, are they likely to come to you if they've got problems? Because if no team member ever comes to you with a problem, that's probably a flag that you need to be able to be easier to talk to. But for the individual team member, it's, talk when you've got issues, ask questions of people around you. And if there are any, particular concerns, hopefully there will be a mechanism for report, like a confidential mechanism for reporting that. So, so use it. If you don't speak up in some form, then nobody's going to know, and things can't change. So those would be the three things.
Yeah, I really like it. The term I really like most, and I use it because I talk about role modeling as a key leadership skill. The shadow you create.
Yeah.
I really like the way you put that. Actually, it is a shadow. You can see that representing down. What is that shadow that you're creating that people have to fall off or falling into? So yeah, Tim, thank you. I really appreciate your input, your insights. And I guess, like for me, around off, one of the things which I haven't said yet is just that I feel like all of this has come to a bit of a head on in regards to like the importance of rest and recovery for allow people to give space. This is where this right to disconnect is, right? Giving people the space to rest and recover to perform better. Like every performance that effort is, you need a bit of time and space to make sure you can put that 100% effort in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's key. As you say, at the root of it, it's common sense that in one form or another we all recognise. But to our point about habits earlier on, it's really easy to get into new and potentially unhelpful habits. So it's a more understanding about where our habits lie, whatever level of an organisation or whatever role we might be doing, and how that affects both us as well as people around us.
Yeah, Tim, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Real pleasure.
Yeah, as I said, really appreciate it. For everybody else, if you're here listening, keep your eye out. There is another LinkedIn Live next week, which is going to be uploaded shortly with Oliver Deasley, who is another hockey player, but this time is actually another performance coach working at NFP. We're talking about performance, talking about the comparison between sports and performance, which would be really cool. Right up my street as well. So keep an eye out for that. But for now, keep your eye out for the YouTube of this coming up and the Spotify coming up. You can watch this whenever you like on repeat. But Tim, once again, thank you for joining me. And for everybody else, have a great week, and I'll see you all soon.
Thanks for having me, Rich. Great.
Yeah.